So let's make sure we can save our product to a file and not to this array here anymore. For this, when we call save here, I want to save it to a file. And of course, in that file, I want to have all products, the old ones and the new one. So therefore, first of all, we need to be able to work with the file system. So I will import fs from the core fs module. Now that file should then also be created in a special path. So I will use the path tool, the path module, to construct a path that works on all operating systems. Now here in save, I will then create my path, and I will do that with path join. So using the path core module. Whoops, and I named this P so that I avoid namespace clashes. And the path should be my root directory, and we actually still have that helper function, but if you deleted it, you can of course recreate it as we did before, or simply copy this code here if you want. You'll also find it attached to this lecture again in case you deleted it. I will simply copy that logic here and move it in there, but of course I could absolutely simply use my helper function I created there. But this is of course just a root directory. In there I will have a new data folder, and I will create that ahead of time so that we don't get permission issues. So I'll have added a data folder to the root project folder, and in that data folder I want to store my file. So that will then actually be a file, and that should have a name of products. And I will give this an extension of JSON because I want to store my data in JSON format. Okay, so that's products. Now to store a new product in there, first of all, I need to get the existing array of products. So I will first of all read that file. So let's use fs read file, and this reads the entire file content of a file. And by the way, for very big files, there are more efficient ways because you don't want to read them all into memory before you work with them. You can read them as a stream them. There is such a function. You can create a read stream with this function, but we can read the entire file here. This is okay. And I will read the file at this path, P, which is that file I'm interested in. And then I will do something once I'm done reading it in. And there we either get an error or we get data. So we get the file content, you could say. There will be a buffer though. Now, let's log the file content here. And let's see what we get if we now call save. If I go to add product and I type something here, it crashes. And it crashes, if we scroll up, because products is not defined in fetch all, of course. In save, however, it didn't throw an error, but we got undefined here, as you can see. And we did get undefined because this file simply doesn't exist. There's no content in it, therefore. You can see that here we got no file with that name. So reading it, therefore, kind of failed. And if I add an error here to print the error we get, and I try this again, so let's go back to add product, click that, and we scroll above this error message here. You see this is the error message we're now logging with this line. And there we see no such file or directory. And that makes a lot of sense because, indeed, it does not exist, as I just mentioned. So obviously, if it does not exist, then I also want to continue. And I can. I will simply check if we got an error, and this will be null if we got none. But if we have one, then I simply want to create a new empty array because we have no existing products JSON file, so we got no old products stored. And otherwise, I want to use the existing one. Put in other words, I'll add a new variable here, which I'll name products. And initially, this is an empty array. And I will actually keep it as such if we do have an error. But if we got no error, and therefore I will add an exclamation mark here. So if we got no error, if this therefore is null, so if we got no error, then I want to read the products from the file which I extracted. So therefore here, I know that file content will be something. It should be the content of my file. And since that is a JSON file, I will store it in JSON format there. So then I will set products equal to JSON, which is a helper object existing in vanilla Node.js. So you don't need to define this on your own. And there we have the parse method, which takes incoming JSON and gives us back a JavaScript array or object or whatever is in the file. So here I can parse the file content, and that should work. Or at least we should try that. So now I know that products will be an array, either the one I read from the file or an empty one. And therefore we can now append our new product there. So I will call products push and push my new product, which is this, onto it. Now important, to ensure that this refers to the class, you should use an arrow function here, because otherwise this will lose its context and will not refer to the class anymore. With this setup though, where I do use an arrow function here, this should refer still to my class, and therefore now I can push this onto this array, either to the new one or the one I read from the file. And now the remaining work is that I need to save it back into the file. So again, I will use the file system module, and now we'll use write file, and I will write it to the same path as where I read it from, and I will put my JSON data into it. So again, I will use that JSON helper object, and now there is the stringify method, which takes a JavaScript object or array and converts it into JSON so that this has the right format. So there I will take this products array and convert this to JSON, and then this gets written to the file. And here I also have a callback where I may get an error, and I will simply log that error here to see if that works. With all that, let's go back. Let's go back to the add product page and click this button. This error, of course, still exists, but now if we scroll up, let's see if that worked. Here, that is looking good, and in data, we indeed see a products JSON file which does contain that one product we created. Now that was the we have no alt data case. Let's now go back and add another product here and see if that also works. If I scroll up, well, we also see it here, I guess. This also worked just fine. So this is working. We are able to read a file, append data to the existing data, or create it if it didn't exist yet. And therefore, our data storage in a file seems to work. Obviously, it's a very basic storage, but better than nothing. Now, obviously, we also want to be able to fetch the data from there. So in fetch all, I also want to read this file here. I will read the file at my path, and I also will therefore get my error or the file content, use an arrow function here, and this will then hold the data I want to use. Now, if I got an error here, I want to return an empty array, because then I got no products, right? I always want to return an array, because that is what fetch all expects, but it should at least be empty in case of an error. And of course, you could also throw an error message and show one, but here it'll just be the empty array. Otherwise, and I don't need an else block, because after return, we would finish the execution of this function anyways. So after this if block, I will return my parsed, and that's important, otherwise it'll just be a string, my parsed file content. And this is important to keep in mind, because this here is in the end retrieved as a text. So to return it as an array, you need to call JSON parse. So now I return my file content in a parsed form, and therefore I get rid of the return product statement here, and I will now always return my objects or my list of products. So let's see this in action. Let's save this and reload this page here. P is not defined. Makes sense. I'm trying to read something from this path, but that path is only defined in the save method. So for now, let's copy it. We can, of course, refactor that, but let's copy it for now. And now if I reload this page, I still get this error. And this can now be very hard to debug or to understand. But do you know what's going wrong here? We'll fix it in the next lecture.